Good evening and welcome to the Shelburne Planning Commission meeting of October 26, 2017. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. We'll consider a motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Kate, seconded by Jason. Any changes, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Agenda's approved. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for October 12, 2017. We'll consider a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Dick.
Second.
Seconded by Perry. Any discussion, changes, comments? I didn't have anything in here.
I didn't find anything.
Looked accurate and perfect as always. Anything? No? Okay. All in favor? Aye. October 12th minutes are approved. Next item on our agenda is disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest with respect to any agenda items. Anything to disclose? Nope. No hands, no voices. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is a brief discussion of subcommittees. The first of which is the Housing Subcommittee. We wanted to formally circulate the final subcommittee charge for the Housing Subcommittee. That should have been included in the packets. As you may recall, we made some minor changes to that at our previous meeting, so we really just wanted everybody to have a final version of that. I will go back to that. Thank you. And the next item within this, anything else on Housing Subcommittee? Everybody?
Added onto this, or is this just different?
This is just the final version. This is the Energy Subcommittee that I will get into next, but this is the final version.
Okay.
Good on the Housing Subcommittee? Great. Next item is a continuation of our discussion of the Energy Subcommittee. This is our newest subcommittee of the Planning Commission, and over the course of the past few weeks, I have been soliciting interest in potential members. We've had a number of folks on the commission suggest some names. We had staff suggest some names. We had others in the community who just have put their hands up graciously, as many in town tend to do here. So this evening, we're at a point where I'm going to appoint 3 members. This is a subcommittee that has no more than 7 members. So we've established it so that it's between 5 and 7. We gave ourselves a little flexibility with the membership, knowing that some people may not always have the ability to come, and more hands on deck the better on that topic, I think was the thinking. So we will appoint 3 tonight, and our outreach continues as far as finding new members. We have a number of good prospects who just haven't committed yet. So the plan will be to complete the balance of the appointments at our next Planning Commission meeting. From there, we will assemble a formal kickoff meeting where the entire group can start to get running on the work. The subcommittee charge has been finalized. We spent a little bit of time on this at the last meeting, just really reorganizing, doing a little bit of fine-tuning and editing to this, and I think it's in a good place now. Hopefully the commission feels the same. And I will make the formal appointments. So I would like to appoint the following residents to the Energy Subcommittee for a 1-year term, beginning on a date to be determined once we complete the outreach for additional subcommittee members. First appointment will be John Pascarella, who has graciously joined us this evening. John's in the back. John, I don't know if you'd like to say hello to the group. No pressure whatsoever, but John has been gracious enough to volunteer with us, and he's here to say hello for a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's nice to meet all of you finally. Looking forward to working together on this project. As Jamie said, my name's John Pascarella. I'm a resident here. I'm actually a Vermont native. I returned to Vermont a couple years ago, and I bought my home in Shelburne last year. So just really excited to be involved, and I appreciate the opportunity.
We're happy to have you. We're
Thanks.
thrilled that you're interested in getting involved, and I think you'll add a ton of horsepower to this group. So thank you again for volunteering. Our next appointment will be Judy Raven for a one-year appointment, beginning on a date to be determined. And the final appointment this evening will be Matt Dooley. So we have 3 on deck here. The minutes will reflect those appointments, and we will continue this discussion of further appointments for the balance of the appointments at our next Planning Commission meeting in November. Any questions, comments about the initial appointments? Okay, we're making good progress on it.
Are we sure we're gonna get 5?
I am confident we're going to get 5. I am thinking we'll almost definitely get 7. And if I would just extend the invitation to anybody watching or anyone in the audience, if there are people who you feel might be good fits, who may be interested in this topic of energy, how it fits into the town, comprehensive plan is sort of really the focus here. There are a number of sub-activities that we contemplated here, but the primary push will be really helping us revise and edit the energy section of the comprehensive plan. No further comment. We will move on to an item that I skipped over inadvertently, which is open to the public. Since we have a number of folks here, I wanted to make sure we covered that as part of our formal agenda. If there are any comments with respect to non-agenda items, now is your time to speak. Seeing no hands, hearing no voices, we will move on to our next item, which is a continued discussion of the comprehensive plan update. That is ongoing, and we have a couple topics here that we're hoping to get through this evening. Education is the first one, and Dean's not here. The only question I had, Andrew Everett unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and I think his name was tagged to lead this, so I'm not sure if we're going to continue the discussion of this or if Dean wanted to provide an update, but since he's right here. Education, did we decide to continue that to a future meeting since Andrew?
You had suggested that. Andrew had thought that since it was such a brief set of changes that maybe Perry
Okay.
and Dick would be able to address it, but I kind of thought it was something that would be deferred.
Okay. Well, since we have not given the heads up to Perry and Dick to take the ball on that, I don't think it's fair, and that's my mistake. So let's just leave that with Andrew. We'll revisit that. It's a brief section of a broader section that within the growth and economic development section. So we'll circle back to that in November. Andrew did make some edits to that, but let's move on to the transportation update. And Commissioner Kate Lally has agreed to take the lead on this. Thank you, Kate, for that. And we will turn the mic over to Kate to walk us through some of her thoughts and strategies with respect to this very important section of the town plan.
Dean, do you by any chance have copies of?
I do.
Oh, great,
I do have
okay.
paper copies of the transportation section, which I had with me moments ago.
Are they right there? By the, Dean, are they right?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you very much. And I still have some more coming out of the copy machine, so if you want to pass those down. And there are some more. on the
Thanks.
buy-in, but I'm not sure how many people. And actually, I'm gonna want to make sure that.
Oh, sorry, I have an extra one. I took 2, yeah.
You want to share this? I guess we'll, that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
This is actually, this came out even today.
Before we get going, Kate, if people have not signed in yet, could I ask you just to sign in for purposes of the minutes? Thank you.
I guess, or I could start.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I was asked to kind of spearhead the review of the transportation section. And so I started by kind of responding to what this section currently states. And I found it, to be reasonable, but to be a little bit wishy-washy about, in terms of clarifying sort of to what end we're supposed to try and achieve, more multimodality and, just what it means to enhance transportation options for walking and biking in the town, which is really one of the primary focuses. And so, so I attacked it from that standpoint to try and get a little more clarity about, to what end we're trying to go here. And it seemed to me that the most straightforward way to do that was to take what I will describe as a placemaking approach. So, many of us are very attached to our town. We live here for specific reasons, and there's a growing interest in increasing walkability and bikeability in the town, and do so in a effective manner that's cost effective, that improves livability, but doesn't happen in a way that sort of ends up wrecking the place in the process. So, because there are many ways to go about doing this, and a kind of more heavy-handed approach is sometimes the result. And in the neighborhood where I live, which is just off of Bay Road, we had a taste of what some of that might be like, and I think a lot of us decided we didn't like it. So anyway, as I said, I have proposed instead to kind of frame this within the very well-known, very tried and true and effective principles of a placemaking approach. And so what placemaking does is it kind of does what it sounds like. So it recognizes the existing context and in places that are already existing, and it also wants to, it's an approach, let's see, I think I describe it right in here. I may have had just put a, okay, it views this, here it is, viewing the street as a means of transportation, but also as part of the public realm. So as a potential gathering place and a place that connects to other destinations. So I think by definition, that really helps to prevent a kind of one-size-fits-all, maybe more highway-oriented approach to achieving multimodality in our community. And it inserts the importance of a more sensitive, context-based approach. So that's really where I started. And so I rewrote the opening statement, and then I added the goal to the existing goal that says to pursue policies that recognize transportation options as a fundamental element of placemaking. So instead of approaching transportation as a separate element, actually relating it to many of the things that support livability in Shelburne. So that is, land use. I get a little bit of energy efficiency in there. Community building, these types of things. So maybe just kind of looking through it is the way to, yeah. You guys are kind of seeing this for the first time, but anyway, so instead of the opening paragraph, I have said, Traditionally, transportation planning was an exercise in moving vehicles efficiently and alleviating congestion. Over the last several decades, the built environment has followed a pattern of auto-dependency at the expense of natural resources, social equity, public health, accessibility, and quality of life. There is now increased interest in expanding that traditional view of transportation planning more broadly to include all types of transportation: walking, biking, transit, freight, also known as multimodal transportation, and thinking about it in terms of a system. This shift in thought and approach provides opportunities to create the type of community Shelburne residents seek. So that's kind of, framing it that way. Shelburne seeks to create a transportation system that, A, provides a variety of good quality travel options for all users, that also recognizes that not all types of travel modes are appropriate for all settings. B, prioritizes where some modes of travel are accommodated to facilitate efficient movement of people and goods. C, ensures that alternate routes between destinations of value are pursued so that an interconnected system is developed. D, creates safe routes to school. And E, complements the desired physical and visual characteristics of the community. So, this may need some, polishing, but this is my attempt to tie it into the rest of the plan, to kind of knit this in a bit more than I think it was before. So I've accepted the existing goal.
Okay if we ask questions?
Sure, yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about what you mean by C, alternate routes between destinations of value.
So I think that's a really compelling way to think about what your objectives are with a transportation system, is, where do you want to be able to go? And one of the things that we have right now in Shelburne, as everybody knows all too well, is we have very few public roads, and they are used by everyone. And this creates problems for motorists who are trying to get around. We get these bottlenecks. And it also creates situations where the roads are really not very safe or rendered less safe for pedestrians and cyclists because there's such heavy use. So I think, the Ty Hall is a great example of an alternate route that exists right now for us to kind of scoot around and get from, a place of value. An example would be, Shelburne Bay Park into the village or the
Sure.
school or something like that.
But you're not talking about alternate vehicular routes?
Oh, just alternate
Alternate
routes,
routes,
yeah.
okay.
I don't know, when that's a question. I mean, we could think about, do we want to think in terms of alternate vehicular routes or just focus on increasing opportunities for bike and pedestrians?
Yeah.
Because I think, right now, we're also talking about maybe how do new areas of the town develop? And if we just keep up with the same model that we've always had, where, it's just a bunch of cul-de-sacs, and then everything funnels out onto, let's say, Webster Road or something like that. I mean, that's not going to make Webster Road particularly, livable over the long run, because it's just going to turn it into a highway. So I think there's some merit to thinking about it in both ways. But we could
Yeah, no, I agree.
clarify
I mean,
that.
Well, I would say one of the differences, though, with Webster Road is that there is the sidewalk/bike area that connects to both Spear and Route 7, goes directly into the town, takes you into the park. And so that's kind of what you're referring to on the multimodal model. And then when you go into that we have limited streets, are we trying to then apply those sidewalks to all neighborhoods? Because I know that there are certain neighborhoods that are very against having sidewalks put in, particularly along that Bay Road corridor, and we need to be respectful of that, but people like to bike and walk along that road because it's beautiful and it's along the bay. And so I think that's kind of the push and pull of this multimodal model, to say, well, we want to have a multimodal model, but only in certain areas, even though we have a very limited network of streets.
Right, well, I think having more flexibility about how we approach that, it makes a lot of sense. In some places, achieving multimodality on a road might not really be as feasible as it might be in other places. So, well, how do we make that connection? You know, are there some other ways to do that? I think I'd like to kind of create a sort of a toolbox for how we can do this. Because, you know, older streets in small towns can face physical constraints that make it hard to add facilities. But that doesn't mean that the facility shouldn't be added somehow or somewhere nearby. So I'm just trying to introduce the idea that it's really important that we have this system in place, and I think we should be flexible about how we consider going about achieving it. You know, and again, the town plan is really thinking, you know, 40 or 50 years out. So, you know, right now, we have a lot of parts of the town that kind of have a more undeveloped or rural aspect to them, but they're in the growth area, so we can expect that that's going to change. I think we need to be planning for how we meaningfully connect all these places up, and how we retrofit existing neighborhoods that maybe lie within this area, and how they get connected. Do we want to connect them so that their, you know, cars can get around, or is the priority more for bicycles and people walking, or some combination of the two? You know, so I'm just trying to flesh out how that might happen. And I think, you know, to have some redundancy in your, particularly in your bicycle and pedestrian network, is actually quite a wonderful thing. That means you have a variety of destinations and you have different ways of getting around, so that you're not just walking or riding the same path this in and the same path out to wherever you're going, but you have a bunch of different, you know, ways to get around. And, you know, I think that would be very expensive to try and set that as a priority for moving vehicles around, but I think it's very cost effective and can make a community very appealing if you can provide ways for cyclists and bicycles to do that. And it also means that we don't have to use our cars so much. So anyway, that was where I was trying to get at, but if that's not clear, maybe we need to sort of say that a little.
I'd just say I like it, because you could have one extreme approach where you say every road has to have a sidewalk or a bike path next to it, and this is just saying you don't necessarily need to have that, you just have to have a means of getting.
You just have to have
having
connectivity. Yeah,
right.
yeah. So,
So what if you changed
B, second sentence, routes to alternative types of transportation between?
yeah, we could do that.
I don't know if it makes a big difference.
And so one of the questions I have is, do you want to try to do the edits on the fly, as we have done before? Kate, do you want to make notes and continue to make the edits to the document that's online?
I could do that, sure, yeah.
I just didn't know
Your
if,
call, Kate.
Yeah, sure, I can just make notes to change that, yeah.
or if I'm doing it online now, I'm going to need to adjust the lights, because the projector,
Yeah,
we've
it's
had all
always-
kinds of
Yeah.
fits with the projector tonight.
Okay.
Um,
If everybody has a hard copy, does anybody want it to be up there?
Well, the projector is, they're able to
Ah.
actually connect to the laptop
Right.
and get a clearer signal online, so anybody watching the video does benefit.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know, I think this is a topic that's pretty important to a lot of people. Maybe there's some benefit to
Could do both, yeah.
hooking
Okay.
up, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Except, like I say, for people that, well, I can see it clearly enough on here, that people are following along, that I won't mess with the lights.
This, of course, assumes there are all the sorts of people watching right now, which is
Hey, I
probably,
watched that
probably
before.
unlikely.
So I'm sorry, the proposed edit was to number B, rather, or whoever, what was the wording to change?
Well, I was just thinking that if we were looking for alternative forms of transportation, it doesn't really matter what it is, just instead of routes, alternative.
Okay, so that's C,
Yeah,
Right.
so just tell me the wording.
Sure is alternate forms of transportation between destinations, I don't know.
yeah, or yeah, that's not, I mean, it's not specifying what type, it's just,
But it ensures that alternate what?
Forms of
Forms.
transportation.
Forms of transportation. So we're not sticking to, by route, it makes it sound like it's a road.
Yeah, to me, it had a connotation of vehicular a little.
So it read, ensures that alternate forms of transportation exist between destinations of
No,
value.
just, we don't need exist, just route between destinations of value.
Yeah.
Alternative forms of
pursued.
it's a fancy way of
transportation
saying
between-
you should be able to ride your bike from, you know, the lake to the village or something like that.
There, got it.
Alternate methods of getting between destinations of value?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
something like that, yeah.
anything.
Okay.
Okay, so new goal.
Okay, so the new goal that is to pursue policies that recognize transportation options as a fundamental element of placemaking, a planning approach that views the street as a means of transportation, but also part of the public realm, a potential gathering place and a place that connects to other destinations.
So can I just interrupt, because as part of my exercise in updating the telecom piece that maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't, but I started to look at some other town plans that I haven't looked at in a bit, and I know we sort of made a commitment to not change our format necessarily, but there was one thing that struck me as that sort of a neat idea and something that I think could help prioritize activities is Heinsberg puts number one goal in this kind of almost cartoonish, almost medallion in the document itself, and it struck me as I'd sort of like to do that, right? It'd sort of be nice to come to a consensus on identifying number one goal, right, for each of these as we go through, and I think it's a challenge in some of these sections to identify one goal that we feel is a priority, but
Almost like a vision statement or
a
something.
little bit. It
Yeah.
felt like, I mean, some of the goals can go on, and you're not sure if I'm sitting in the planning commission chair years down the road, like, which one should we tackle, right? So I like the idea of at least prioritizing visually number one goal, right? And maybe we can find alignment on one goal that we can put that designation on. And maybe we won't agree on it, and that's fine.
Maybe we
But
can
it just visually struck me, we've talked about how do we sort of
can we just,
dial up the visual presentation of this whole thing,
Yeah.
and ours is just
yeah,
down
really
there.
horrible.
You know what I mean? It's a very narrative plan that is hard to read for us, and it's, I have to imagine, even more challenging for people to spend time on just because of the format itself. And without making substantial changes in the format presentation, which I think we committed to, it'd be nice to do a few little small things like that that help.
Okay.
And the good thing is these two could be merged.
They could be merged.
Maybe
Yeah.
Leading with goal 2, you could incorporate the content of goal 1.
Okay.
Yeah, seems
Yeah,
like
I
they
mean,
should
that-
be probably merged.
Can I ask you guys to speak louder?
Yes.
Sure.
Is the rain in
I
the
don't know what
background?
it is.
Okay.
I'm getting old.
I can hear it. We all are.
Bugs at home, sorry.
Okay. We will speak loudly. So sorry to interrupt. I was just suggesting maybe we should adopt that idea of number one goal. And your new goal struck me as that would be a really meaningful number one goal to me. It just jumps out as something that, yep, let's anchor around that as something we want to get after as part of this entire transportation conversation. And the other goals should all follow, right? That should sort of set the stage, and then everything else is almost not secondary, but flows naturally from that top.
Oh, so you're saying you could still have, because some of
You
these
could have other
sections have
goals.
multiple goals.
Yeah, I'm just saying, let's
But have
identify
one
one,
big
right?
one.
Like, this planning commission will identify one, number one goal for each of these sections. Maybe we won't, but for this one, maybe we can. And we'll see how the others go. But it struck me as something I think might help decision-making from a policy perspective for future planning commissions as well as other committees and the select board.
Okay.
Do we like that idea?
Yeah.
Can we? Okay.
So I will reorder them. I'll take the proposed edit and put
Yeah.
it ahead of the other one.
And if we can somehow make a comment about the visual,
And I think this could be
aspects of
really,
this.
this whole thing could be a lot more synthesized than it
Yeah.
is. It's a lot of redundancy
Yeah.
and duplication, but it was the best I could pull off
oh
with
no, it's great.
a
It's a
pretty
first
busy
pass.
week.
Let's keep going through it, but it just,
But I thought that the placemaking thing was like, a framework I thought there we could get a lot of buy-in around as a, sort of a rubric for organizing
yeah.
this.
I'm just trying to find opportunities to get
Yeah.
away from the 8.5 by 11 narrative,
Yeah.
12-point
Yeah.
font, because the other plans I was looking at they were more enjoyable to read and more
Mm-hmm.
compelling looking at them, so.
So after the goal statements, it says Shelburne, I changed it from what it had said before, which was to deliberately, Shelburne's transportation system encompasses these different things, including parking, and then it said, while it is important that all of these be treated as an integrated system, for clarity, they will be discussed separately. And I guess my great radical move was to say, no, we're not doing that. We're going to talk about them all, as a system. So, so this is my first attempt at how to do it, and it needs a lot of editing, but here's a first pass. So I say instead of understanding transportation as a separate element and function as was done in the past, transportation will be integrated with natural resource protection, energy use, and development. Connecting each with the other will result in an informed system that expands transportation choices, reinforces the livability of neighborhoods, supports a strong and diverse economy, reduces water pollution and conserves natural resources, and lessens reliance on the automobile while maintaining accessibility. So, a lot of ambition there, obviously, and hopefully, I make the case somewhat strongly for each of those claims. So I created a new objectives section to kind of hang, to talk about objectives in the aggregate rather than just separately. So that starts off, recognize that Shelburne's transportation system is the glue that holds the community together and is the foundation upon which all aspects of the community emerge. Now, that's somewhat aspirational. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's consistently the case everywhere. It's maybe what I would like to see, and I think what I think would be very beneficial for this community. And so when space in public rights of way is reprioritized, valuable improvements that build community can be pursued. And I think I wanted to put that way about valuable improvements. Like that speaks to how we pursue this. So, and the importance of context in informing, what's right in one spot may not be right in another, and trying to create a way to go about doing this that builds in flexibility. So recognize that vehicular traffic isn't the sole function of a street. There are stormwater functions and placemaking functions to streets. Support existing neighborhood character while enhancing livability and improving water quality and stormwater management by aligning transportation goals with watershed protection goals, priorities. So I think that's a way to, right there is a way to make sure we don't end up with something that's overbuilt, because we're going to be trying to, in landscape architecture, there's this really nice turn of phrase that talks about designing things so that they lie lightly on the land. And I think that's just a really beautiful visual image. And we all know what, something that, we might not be able to picture immediately in our heads what something that lies lightly on the land looks like, but we all know something that doesn't lie lightly on the land. That's very easy to imagine. So recognize that residents want enhancements, but they don't want this to result in roads that don't fit the neighborhood scale. Improvements that add pedestrian infrastructure while creating safer conditions can also negatively impact neighborhoods where they are implemented. Negative outcomes include traffic speeds increasing, street trees being removed. In addition to altering the character of neighborhoods, this can result in more impervious surface than necessary. So foster a collective community mindset that accepts new ways of creating accessibility with engagement, dialogue, education, and information to achieve positive, comprehensive outcomes for residents' quality of life. Using a placemaking approach to determine standards that result in right-sized street improvements and a process for intervening in parts of the town impacted by vehicular traffic hazard. So Shelburne's not a really big place. I think we don't have a ton of roads. I think we can probably come up with, ways to do this that will enhance places where they happen. So one way so the big question, how? Pursue a complete streets policy for Shelburne that draws from best practices but is tailored to fit the town's needs, vision, and goals. Engage the community in determining an overall multimodal vision to expand Shelburne's bicycling and pedestrian network. Develop specific street typologies, and I apologize if that's too architect-y talk, that identify how much design flexibility a road can afford based on traffic volume, terrain, natural features, existing land use, what destinations it serves, and whether it is a key artery for pedestrians and cycling. So it's this idea is, what should go where approach. And the great news is there's a ton of really great open source information on this out there. So I think this is something that, the PAS committee could tackle. Okay, and then I kind of went back into the former.
Yes.
And just tried to do a first pass at editing that. So sidewalks, paths, and trails.
Do we want to talk about the objectives at all? Does
Yeah,
anybody-
sure, if.
I mean, I love that. That just feels like such a modern update to this
Oh, good.
section.
Okay.
And I think it resonates with everything that I've experienced in town.
Okay.
And conversations that are ongoing within the town. I think it addresses things that we need to address and doesn't pretend to offer solutions necessarily, but gives some guidance around an opportunity that might work, complete streets, right? Sort of being this, maybe this is just the
Yeah.
mindset or the lens through which we should be thinking about some of this decision-making.
Yeah, because I think if we can get a framework where, what we've seen, which is, I think, very frustrating, certainly to me, because I like to walk and cycle and live in a community where I can do that easily, it is kind of unfortunate lack of consensus about how to do this that's then turned into people questioning whether we should have this at all, which I think is so unhelpful. And I think there's not a lot of understanding of, or common ground, I guess I would say, on what these things ought to look like, and a predictable framework where people, if a sidewalk is coming to your street, you have an idea of what you can expect, So I wanted to get us all closer to being on the same page about this multimodality and being able to get around by walking and bicycling as well as by car, having more general buy-in in the town, number one, and then suggest a framework for how we go about approaching this. And I really think that we need to have some kind of a town-wide visioning thing. and on how to do that, and kind of tackle the town place by place, you know. And there may be parts of the town that are more interested in other parts in having something like this. You know, the group that has formed around the Marset Falls Road area springs to mind as an example of, you know, a bunch of residents that have, you know, really taken it upon themselves to get this going in their neighborhood. So, you know, I think we can kind of do this on a case-by-case basis, which would make it easier to do.
How do others
Yeah.
feel?
I really like it. I'm trying to think in parallel that I don't think getting to ultimately what this can deliver would be without challenge. I think that there would be some difficult conversations, but I love setting a vision like this because I'm in full agreement with it. And I like the idea of potentially being able to solicit ideas for projects by communities based on what they would like and what they know about movement within their communities, and then look at a broader vision of how to interconnect those sub-projects, if you will. But yeah, I really like it.
Dick, feel good about the concepts and
Yeah, I like the
direction where
general
we're.
idea. I have one little edit I would like to
Okay.
offer on the second paragraph, second sentence. It says there are stormwater functions. I'd just like to say there are stormwater and utility functions, because we have other utilities. We may want underground power, we may want
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Good call.
sewer, who knows what, water.
Yeah.
So if I could just ask a quick question. I feel like I'd be not responsible doing the kind of work that I do if I didn't mention functional classification. And so I guess I'm going to ask you, Kate, are you seeing the ideas that you want to put in the plan as do you see it as rejecting functional classification? Do you see it as a refinement of functional classification? It's functional classification, for everyone's benefit, is a system that's been around and used by transportation planners and engineers for decades that assigns roads to different categories, and we can get into that in more detail, but it's done on a statewide level, it's done on a regional level, and so there is an existing functional classification map that divides the roads in Shelburne and Chittenden County and all of Vermont into categories. And I'm just curious, and I think it could go either way, but is what you are envisioning somehow a rejection of that, and it's going to be better because there are flaws with functional classification? Do you see it as something that's building on it so that I could show you a functional classification map and people could use it as the point of departure? I'm just not sure where you're coming from relative to that, and it would help me.
I think functional classification refers to the movement of cars, vehicular traffic on roads, and how well they support that or not. It doesn't speak at all to placemaking. And so I would be.
So in the memo that I covered the package, I had indicated that, you know, some of the things that could be mentioned are functional classification. But in Vermont, we also have this situation where, in addition to people using functional classification as a planning tool, we have a law that is intended to require municipalities and the state, every time they do projects, to accommodate all categories of users. So that law, in a sense, I think, helps make functional classification in Vermont better because it implies at least that you're going to consider all modes.
Is
Yes.
that complete streets?
Sorry?
Is the law complete streets?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So although historically functional classification is seen as a highway-oriented tool, it's really not. It's all about the focus on certain roads having an arterial function where the purpose is moving. It's not about providing access. And then on the other end, it's about access, and the focus is not on through movement. And that it's mode agnostic. So anyway, I was just trying to get a handle on,
So maybe they're not necessarily contradictory.
Yeah.
I don't view them as mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and I guess I don't see functional classification really referenced in here. Am I missing?
No, I
We
didn't,
talk about function in a few places, but
no, I didn't go anywhere near that, because I was, but we
Yeah.
could certainly add it in. I mean, particularly if it's gonna, if
Do you-
if that's
do you
where.
think they butt heads?
no,
if
I
you
do
have
not.
as
I think there's a lot of
minor-
utility in the concept.
Right.
So
They
that's
could
what
be
I was trying to get a handle on
complementary.
is
Okay.
that in working with you, am I to see this as we don't want to go anywhere near it, or we want to build on it, essentially?
Well, I would say we want to build on it, but in a
When it
way,
makes sense.
yeah, but in a way that supports placemaking.
When it's consistent with the policies that we're developing here.
Right,
Right,
community,
where it's
which I would
foundational to-
describe at bottom as community building.
Yeah, and so the thing that, maybe to put a point on all of this, like I said, there's a statewide functional classification map. The Regional Planning Commission was involved last year, I think it was, in updating that map. The plan could recommend a Shelburne version of that map, and that could mean that in the future, the next time the functional classification map is updated, it's updated to reflect your map.
Okay.
That hasn't
I like
happened
that.
before.
So it's a
Do
regional map?
municipalities have functional classification
I can show
maps?
you, I can show you quickly what I'm talking about. If you're gonna be able to see it with this lousy projector. You're probably not gonna be able to make heads or tails of it. Yeah, we can try that, but we'll. We might wanna do both. This is gonna be crappy.
No?
At the time.
It is.
Well,
yeah.
I can send
It's a
everyone a
planning
link
term.
and we can have a link shown that, because it's on a website. But essentially, there are two things to keep in mind. One is it's a series of categories that range from collectors to arterials.
Mhm.
And then there's also a variation in that scheme, whether we're talking about what are called urbanized areas and what are called rural areas. So they each have their kind of corresponding scheme. And so we have parts of Shelburne that are in the urbanized system, and we have parts of Shelburne that are in the rural. But if we can just kind of blur that, we would understand that Route 7 is an arterial. It's a principal arterial.
Mhm.
And that Long Meadow, as an example, is a local street.
Mhm. Okay.
And I wouldn't see that being ignored at all with any plan that we put in place, because the reality is, you still have to, I mean, people still need to move.
Yeah, if anything, the placemaking approach takes a finer grained approach, really kind of drilling down into, because,
Yeah.
I think we're, to use your example of Long Meadow, I mean, we're talking about how do we enhance those kinds of places as supporting the character of the neighborhood when we do intervene in them.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of functional classification thing is sort of more oriented to moving traffic around at the sort of, between, like, let's say Church Street and Route 7 or something, how, that scheme that was done a few years ago.
Yeah, this is kind of a classic graph. It's or image that's used every time people talk about this thing, making clear that at one end of the spectrum, we are talking about movement, and it's typically involving cars. Although if we look globally, we see places like Germany that are building what are essentially bicycle superhighways, and so those would be arterials for bikes. But at the other end, and I think where the action is in Shelburne is figuring out where the collectors are, and it'll mean certain things in terms of improvements, and where the cutoff point is for local, and what that is going to mean in terms of the level of improvement. So,
Yeah, what does that, when you say improvements, what does that mean?
well, I mean that to get at the issue that has maybe come up in connection with Bay Road, there may be a certain road corridor that has a number of vehicles that essentially dictates that for the less experienced cyclist, there shall be a separate facility. That it really is warranted for the safety and convenience of a cyclist, let's say a non-experienced cyclist, that they have their own facility, something physically separated. But and so that's what I'm referring to, that kind of thing. It could be a roadside path, or it could be an on-road bicycle lane, which may be okay with a different set of situations, and they can work with both high volume and low volume, or something that is even less. It could be just signage or paint, and the road itself isn't changed.
Got it. I'm just trying to understand why these designations matter.
So,
Is
Well,
it
they help
because
with
of
they help with
improvement?
decision-making, and so I'll illustrate.
With respect
Bay
to
Road
improvement.
is listed in the functional classification system as something where it's not all about access. It acknowledges, by virtue of the fact that it's called a collector, that moving vehicles or moving people is part of the role that road plays. And so if that's accepted as a given, that can help determine what kinds of facilities are appropriate. And it wouldn't necessarily be something that is, the least that you can do to provide some service. It may be that we recognize that with that volume of vehicles, then a certain type of facility is warranted. I'm just using that as an example.
yeah, right, but I think that the shortcoming of that approach, if I may say so, is that it pits existing character of the area against providing safety for, for example, the vulnerable cyclist. So there's got to be some way to say, in these situations, take a more refined approach to how that problem can be solved. Because what we've ended up with is a situation where, people were like, no how, no way. And so now we have we have incredibly unsafe conditions, and nothing has changed, So there has to be some more flexible way forward, and that's where I think a placemaking approach can help with some of that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think just to sum it up, it's probably, you don't want to throw these out with the bathwater, right? Like, I think functional classification seems like it could be a helpful reference in decision-making going forward, and it doesn't necessarily need to be thrown out, but at the same time, I don't think we want to tie our hands to classifications that were made at a point in time and
Or like I was saying, you have the opportunity perhaps to influence the future classification.
yeah.
Right,
I think it's
exactly.
a helpful reference, but
Yeah.
to the extent we need to add a note about that in this section, we should do that, but I think they can coexist, is where I come out on it.
Okay.
I don't know how others feel.
So, Dean, do you have a place where you would suggest adding the functional
not at this point.
classification? No, you don't? Okay.
Not at
We
this
just
point.
need to fit that in somewhere? Okay.
Well, I just wanted to know, as the conversation goes forward now, it could be something that you want to get at when you get to the highway section, but,
Okay,
I just wanted to read.
okay. So that would be maybe where it would make sense to put, okay. All right, so sidewalks, paths, and trails. I just made this a little stronger. Instead of saying Shelburne intends to continue its commitment, I just said expand Shelburne's integrated network of, et cetera. Just do it.
Yes.
And we can move the mic around, or?
Ellen McShane, 743 Bay Road. I would like to suggest at the end of that first sentence, that comply with the placemaking planning approach. Just so that you reference back to, I think, the excellent work that you've done.
Which
to-
sentence are we talking
Which-
about?
The
Which
very
one?
first sentence
Of-
just what Kate read, she didn't finish the whole sentence.
After modes?
After modes that comply with a placemaking planning approach.
Okay, like in a manner that complies.
Yeah, because you've done such an excellent job of
Yeah.
laying out community
That are
building and
consistent with
safety. Right, just to keep the theme going. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because the goal is to, down the road, is to create a system where somebody could say, what is meant by that, and then they could actually flip to, there'd be some manual or whatever, that would kind of give them an idea of what to expect. Okay,
So instead of going word by word,
Yeah.
we could sort of hit the highlights on the new
Okay.
content, for example, and then, to the extent you're tweaking stuff or
Yeah.
adding key concepts, like number 4, for example, that seems like a good one to talk about, but same with number 2.
okay. Yeah, so number 2, I just added that, identify opportunities to develop interconnected networks of bicycling and walking facilities that can offset challenges due to a lack of through roadways, high vehicular traffic on major roads, and physical constraints in the right-of-way. Creating access to key locations in Shelburne need not be developed by a single trail, sidewalk, or bike lane, but may be comprised of many facilities that support walking and bicycling throughout the community. So I would say that, Bay Road is maybe a good example of that. Like, right now, you can, to take your life into your hands, but you can walk on the street or ride your bike on the street, and then you get to Shelburne Bay Park, and you can, transition into that, or you can go on the Ty Hall path and come into the village, and then once you're on Harbor Road, you can pop onto either ride in the street, or you can be on a sidewalk, or what have you. So it's kind of thinking that way.
I like it.
Yeah.
I would probably take out the acronym and just spell out right away,
Oh, okay.
just so it's understood.
Okay. Increase pedestrian access by requiring private development of walkways, as opposed to creating incentives, like just make it happen. Even South Burlington, when somebody, these days, when somebody wants to do something, they're pulling a permit on Route 7, they are required now to actually add a front path that connects to the public sidewalk, I mean, this just seems, in this day and age, Anyway,
Any objections to that?
no.
Yep. Dick put a big smiley face next to that.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
provide safe and maintained crossings where sidewalks, paths, or trails intersect vehicular roadways. I have noticed, maybe others have too, that we don't always maintain our pedestrian and cycling infrastructure as rigorously as we do our vehicular infrastructure, striping and stuff. And so I just want to put that on the same footing.
Yeah, I think that's a good budget call out.
Yeah.
When they go through the budget process, making sure that dollars are allocated to.
Yeah,
vehicular.
yeah, so maybe we can make a note of that
Yeah,
budget
That's a good point.
allocation, okay, ensure this or something,
Mhm.
yeah.
Is this an actual edit, or is this something that,
Yeah, I think so, on 3,
okay, I just
maybe we
wanted
could
to,
ensure, budget, adequate budget is provided for this or something.
okay, but how, if you have the specific wording, just tell me and I'll type it.
After the period, say, what were you thinking, Jamie? Ensure,
Yeah, I was just thinking out loud.
ensure sufficient
Ensure adequate
funds.
funding
Yeah.
for non-vehicular,
For upkeep of
For
non-vehicular.
upkeep of non-vehicular
Perfect. Yeah. We have all these editors on the
networks.
committee, we're so lucky. So convenient between you and Andrew.
Just throwing words out there.
Um, Develop and maintain a formal system of primitive paths in parks and selected natural areas. And I thought with guidance from the Shelburne Natural Resources and Conservation Committee about, how that should best happen. 'Cause I don't always know.
Why is primitive paths capitalized too? Is that weird?
I don't know.
I would just add that the Paths Committee also has and been involved in some primitive paths on public
Okay.
properties
Yeah,
in the
let's
past. So
add them
just,
too.
Well, and pathers, yeah, just, you know,
Let's add
and
the-
just punt to those guys to figure out how this is
Guidance
supposed to
from
happen.
the Shelburne
Oh, Wendy wants to say something.
Bike Ped Committee.
Can I ask a procedure?
Please, you can just grab the mic.
Hi, Wendy Seville, I'm the chair of the Paths Committee. I just have a,
Welcome.
thank you. I have a procedural question. When we're going through all of this and you're doing these edits, when does this become formal adopted? Is this
Yeah.
adopted tonight?
No.
Okay,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just because our committee just
Yes.
met recently, and I'm sure they'd
Yes.
like to
we
ring
would
in on some of
absolutely
the,
Yeah,
balance
so
the wording.
I guess Dean can, this is on Google Docs, Dean can make this available
yeah,
to
the link
to you,
is,
so you guys can kind of comment, because we'd love to get your feedback on, I'm sort of spitballing on a lot of this, so, you know, some of it may
Okay.
not be what you
We-
want
we
or
made-
practical
We've made
or.
some comments about the previous iteration, so.
Oh, okay.
This is brand new to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
and
And I
would be
guess
to the
I
committee.
would say, to the extent, since we have people here, if you have comments on content that we were going through that matches up to the former version, then please weigh in.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
we'd love to hear those comments, and
Yeah.
if you want to submit written comments, please do that.
Okay,
And
But
actually
I
on-
didn't want it to become just us talking when,
Yeah, and on the
We
Google
have you guys
Docs, there
here.
is a way to, you use the suggest mode, and
Mhm.
you can just, you know, add in, we've done this actually with the Natural Resources Committee on some things that we were working with that, on them with that about. So it would be great to have your, just, well, kind of get
Are
this
you-
so would
done.
these be individual edits by individual members of the committee?
I would
'Cause
think
we're not
that,
allowed, we can't talk to each other.
Yeah.
Unless we're in a
I
set
would-
meeting
I would
that's.
think that maybe you guys could look at it all together during your meetings.
Yeah.
And then do your edits then, and then
Just
maybe
designate
you
someone
Okay,
could,
to
that's,
or
that's
somebody.
what I was thinking
Yeah,
procedurally, but
yeah.
are you
I-
are you interested in the timing of the overall?
I'm interested in
Process.
the procedure and the
Yeah,
timing.
Yeah, so the timing for
January,
us,
February?
yeah, no, I think we'd probably get to a point where we have a, what, alpha version, what are we calling it?
alpha draft,
An
yeah.
alpha draft by maybe
April?
maybe later.
Okay, phew, okay.
Yeah, so at that
Yeah.
point, we have to warn a public hearing, it has to go through the public hearing.
Oh, okay.
And then it
Yeah.
goes to the select board for a
Okay.
public
Yeah.
hearing, so
How big is
we have a
your
ways to go,
I'm sorry?
How many members?
We're small, 5.
yeah,
So
good.
2 people can talk to each other.
Correct. Yeah, well, unless we warn it as a meeting. Yeah, we can't email back and forth about things.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to have your
Yeah.
collective feedback on this, so please.
But
yeah.
the good news is there's time.
Yes,
Yeah,
we have
plenty of time, okay, I'll.
Yeah, not as much time as everyone thinks.
Right, but still.
Well,
we
you've got
have
the whole
time.
thing, our, you know, our
Right.
focus is.
Don't get
is-
lazy.
Is
Yeah,
small.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, let's keep plugging away.
Okay. And again, just sort of strengthening, you know, providing access to the primitive paths from the sidewalk, path, and road system, including consideration of adequate parking, a priority as a practical and cost-effective means to expand options for walking and recreation. And where I was thinking about when I wrote that in was just noticing as I drive on Falls Road, that little tiny bit of sidewalk that was just put in that connects to the Shelburne,
Scenic overlook.
yeah, the what's it called?
The scenic overlook. Is that
Yes,
what
the
you're
senior
talking
overlook. I mean, people are using that. It's being very heavily used already. So it was just a small thing, and it's already made a big difference. So let's see, recommended actions. I asked Dean to send around earlier this week.
about? No.
The Small Towns and Rural Multimodal Networks workbook or guidance manual, and which I have found to be just really very effective at portraying ideas that have been used in other parts of the country. Alta Design was one of the kind of authors of this, and they've made it an open source document. So if you get a chance, I'd really suggest just taking a look at it. It starts to really show in contexts that are like ours, how these enhancements can be achieved. And it shows how there are numbers of ways that it can be achieved. So I thought that would be, in lieu of knowing exactly what complete streets thing we want to do, just a starting point. Let's see. Okay, in the
We
four.
could see that too, that would be great.
Sure, yeah.
Or just send us the link,
I
maybe.
did.
Did
It's-
you already
I
do
did.
that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's the document that
Okay.
looks like,
Is that the 40 megabytes?
it's the big, well, it's the one, I think I compressed it and got it to 15.
Okay, great. If we
Oh.
have it, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But if you have any problems getting it.
Yeah, it's great. So let's see, number 4, in the village, prioritize sense of place and identity by expanding pedestrian friendliness and safety. Create a street typology based on the context to determine the location of sidewalks, street trees, and on-street parking. Without exception, all village streets should have a sidewalk on at least one side of the road. Speed limits should be lowered to be compatible with pedestrian activity. Study the benefits of adopting Vermont Route 7 from the La Platte River to the Vermont Teddy Bear as a Class 1 highway. I think, if we can, the Select Board is very focused when this topic comes up on the cost of it. And I think that some of the livability benefits get lost in that. And I think there's more balance in that suggestion than maybe, we've chosen to leverage in the past. So I just wanted to,
I think that's consistent with what we've talked about with the Southern Gateway conversation as well.
yes,
right?
yeah,
I mean, it's not a new
right. So I think we can,
topic or a strategy that we haven't talked about, right? Like it's
yeah,
been
yeah.
discussed and
But I think if this can kind of get wrapped into a larger discussion, it has more, it might seem more compelling as something to talk about. So anyway, let's see. And then I think require subdividers to grant easements of planned paths and trails as part of the subdivision approval path. I mean, just do it, because then we're coming back and begging these people or something, it just seems.
Standard operation in other towns.
It is, exactly, yeah. And it's, it's a cheap way to plan for, it's.
it's simple.
Yeah. So, let's see. And then number 6, Shelburne's limited network of public roads, lack of redundant or alternative routes for getting around, lower densities and distances between parts of the town combine to increase the auto orientation of the town's public roads. A singular focus on automobile mobility that results in a lack of facilities for people walking and bicycling and makes travel by these modes difficult and less safe. To offset this, all new development seeking project approval by the Development Review Board must grant sidewalk or path construction easements along any road in the town for which the CCRPC transportation count shows an average daily vehicular count of 3,000 or higher. And that, I wanted to, maybe we just take that CCR, just like every road, they have to do this, because maybe that's the 3,000 vehicular count today. Well, what if that changes and then we've missed this opportunity to, snag an easement and then conditions are very different in the future. So I didn't want to take that on with this pass, but
No, I mean, again, this flows from what we did in the form-based code
yeah,
as well. Took a
I just want to make my kind of standard caution about the need for.
Stop her.
Yeah, the rational nexus and rough proportionality, that, a blanket statement that says that a developer will always be required to do this is kind of shaky.
okay.
As I think any attorneys in the room who practice land use law might say. So anyway, I'm raising that as a flag, and it's the one I always raise. There needs to be a rational relationship. You can't burden the developer to meet a need that their project isn't creating. And you can't make them build something that is wildly out of proportion or disproportionate from the demands that are created. You can ask. And a lot of communities are, it may come about as a result, but it's not a strict requirement. There's some give and take that's resulting in it. So anyway, just my flag. I'm not telling you any specific edits to make, but I'm just raising the flag.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think how to,
It needs to be written so that the DRB is strongly encouraged.
I mean, can we say
Wants the trade-off.
shall, comma, to the extent consistent with applicable law? Would that give us enough? Talk to us about the proportionality piece too, since I'm not as familiar.
So it's just, imagine I'm just trying to think of some of the classic examples that arose from some of the big court cases that tended to be from California, where the California Coastal Commission was requiring some small developer to, I believe, build some kind of pedestrian walkway along an edge of the property that I think served people who were using that area to get to the beach or along the ocean. And the developers didn't really have anything to do with that. And I believe a municipality was trying to impose on them the requirement to build this, but it raises that case, or others like it, raise this issue that if you're making the developer do something, it needs to be rational. There needs to be a rational nexus between the thing that you're requiring and what they're proposing.
Shelburne is a town where everybody wants to be able to walk and bicycle everywhere. I mean, is that not clear enough? So we don't want, I mean,
is
they would be
clear. I mean, I
making,
do
I'm just
agree
trying
it's
to play
clear.
devil's advocate a little bit, but what's so maddening to me is there's never any, when we're talking about cars, it's always like, oh, of course, we're going to be requiring this and that. But, we're in a beg mode where it comes to pedestrians and cyclists. And, I mean, all indications are that people really want to be able to safely get around.
Well, as you know, because there were some substantial edits made to the zoning regulations and the site plan criteria, there is a lot of language that imposes some of this type of requirement on development. You've already moved forward with some of that. Roads, to the extent that we specify requirements, are different because they're subdividing land, and the general consensus is that for the lot to be created, you have subdivision regulations, they need to be able to fulfill the purpose that you're creating them for. So if you're creating single-family lots, people need to get to them. The way they typically get to them is through frontage on a public highway or access to that highway that meets some standard. And so for people to subdivide land, they need to demonstrate that access is provided. We just tend to make sure that the access is provided by cars. That's what we've been doing since, the 1930s. But I'm not saying that you could never make the emphasis, you could never say to a developer, hey, instead of providing your access by cars, you could provide it via people. But I think given the choice, they're gonna wanna make sure that the access is for cars, because there's more of a market for lots where people can get to them by cars.
Right, but the example of having a house on a lot and needing to get access to it, that wouldn't have an average daily vehicular count of 3,000 or higher.
Say again?
It wouldn't have an average daily vehicular count of 3,000 or higher.
Right, so this, as it's worded, is saying construction easements along any road in the town, so I think in this particular case, if someone is doing a development and that development incorporates land that has that frontage, this is saying that in the course of that subdivision proposal, if it's a heavily trafficked road, they should provide a sidewalk or path. If we bring this into the village, I mean, your regulations already have required sidewalks in certain dense districts, and I'm not saying that that's not justifiable. It's in a village setting, and there are people walking all over the place in a village setting, and so I think that's probably, there's a rational nexus and there's rough proportionality. But if we make a blanket statement that every developer everywhere for every kind of project must give an easement to the town, because those sidewalks are often constructed in the public right-of-way. You know, it's not forcing,
Them to give anything away. Yeah.
yeah, I don't mean to derail this. I just wanted to
It's good.
raise the
It's a good
conversation.
point, because we don't want to be reckless with how we're,
Maybe we don't need the
Drafting this.
count, though.
But it's just saying easement, so does that, it's just an easement.
Increase the standard.
yeah. Must grant an easement for either
Well, and-
bike lanes.
An easement, to me, doesn't mean that it would be, I mean, that would be part of the property that is being subdivided. So it'd be
Usually-
creating an easement on the property that is being subdivided.
Usually you ask for an easement for future
Right.
path, we've got one on Dorset Street that'll probably never get used on the O'Brien property in the meadow across the road from, we have a, is it 15-foot easement that we were thinking would tie into Dorset Street, but I don't think South Burlington wants to come down.
But if
So,
you,
but on the other hand, if you were building a development and you have houses in there, then you have kids and you have sidewalks, so you need to provide a sidewalk along the frontage of your property at the least. That should be a requirement. I think that's a distinction, isn't it? That it's being utilized by that developer for that development.
Well, I mean, if we can look at a project like the Quiniesca proposal, or the Snyder proposal for the Quiniesca lands, 91 units, in a relatively dense situation, with a system of streets that they are intending to be made public infrastructure. So the idea that it will become town infrastructure gives us the leverage to say, ye shall build it to the public works specifications. And if they're going to be turning over that strip of land to the town, it's going to become our responsibility, once it's turned over, to maintain it. And the same thing applies to the sidewalks, but they've already accepted this idea that it's going to become part of the town highway system, and if there are sidewalks in it, those sidewalks will be part of the town sidewalk system. You know, they are essentially desiring, all the policies in our subdivision regulations encourage this idea that the facilities will be built to town standards and then turned over to the town to be part of our system. But not there is not a requirement that that will happen. So some developers will do a project and they might put sidewalks in them, but the sidewalks will either be on private land, or maybe in the case of, you know, the affordable housing project at the top of the hill, the town has an easement across that land.
What do we think here? Maybe we bracket this section for now and come back to it, since it sounds like we may have a little more study to do. I mean, when I read this, establish rules for project approval that encourage the granting, the old language isn't bad necessarily, because ultimately it's up to the planning commission to create those rules, right? Whether it's within the bylaw or subdivision regulations, so.
Okay, so
Thi-
maybe.
This document doesn't necessarily regulate, am I correct on that? Dean, I mean, if we had this statement in there but didn't have the
As
regulatory
rewritten,
backup to do this, right? Like, I'm not sure.
As rewritten, are you wondering, would it have regulatory effect? Is that?
I guess that's what I'm asking. I'm thinking that maybe we just add more aggressive language around establishing rules, right? Maybe that's not,
Yeah, maybe that's the way to go.
instead of just making this all new development must grant, it sounds almost,
So maybe to offset this, establish rules for project approval by
that
the,
grant,
yeah,
right? That
okay,
grant,
to offset.
not that encourage the granting of the grant sidewalk, right?
Yeah,
That way you
for
can put
sidewalk
punt on
or
the actual
path.
work and the policy statements there for the planning commission to work on.
Yeah.
Is that
That-
palatable?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Is that workable from a,
Yeah, I am, I
You're okay
think
with
I've
that?
done enough.
yeah, okay. No, I want to make sure we're not tripping up.
Yeah, okay, I think that salvages that pretty simply. So to
Okay.
offset this, establish rules for approval by the development, for for project approval by the Development Review Board that grant
Yes,
sidewalk or path construction easements
Mhm.
along any road, blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
Yeah,
right?
And are you just
Mhm.
looking for easements, or are you also looking for paths and sidewalks?
I think maybe we could get into that with the rules, and just stick with at least the easements for now. I don't know.
Yeah,
Because it talks about, of either bicycle lanes, okay, I guess those are easements. Yeah, I don't know.
all right, so let's keep working through this.
Yeah.
Next page has one
This,
new.
I mean, I'm trying to keep the focus on, gee, don't we all agree it would be really nice to have blah, 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 and then get everybody to hopefully agree, and then move forward with how we do that. That's sort of the,
Yeah, no, I
how
think
I
we're
see
with you on the
this. Yeah.
concept. It's just how we craft that language.
I
to make
know,
sure
I
we're
know.
not-
I just had one quick question on the speed limits, because you mentioned that. and
Yeah.
It's something that I was thinking about. What authority does the town have to set the speed limits within the roads that are owned by the town versus the speed limit on Route 7 as you go into Shelburne? Like, how is that?
The town doesn't have any control over Route 7 or Route 116 as state highways. That's under
Yep.
state jurisdiction.
But like the core of the town center, could we say like it's 15 miles per hour?
Right here on Route 7, but when you say the core, you
Like,
mean?
I mean, like where that mobile gas station is and where the school is and all that. I understand there's a school zone, but right there where we're trying to create this core walkability, historic Vermont town center, can we say speed limit's 15 miles an hour?
No.
State, yeah.
I mean, not
You
without
could on-
legislative change.
You could on Harbor Road.
Well, if a traffic study,
Why?
You have to maintain standards depending on the road, so it has to be engineered.
yeah, the
And they
speeds,
tried to change the speeds on Falls
So
Road
how
for
did,
years.
how did Burlington get 25 miles per hour?
it's chartered as a city, and that is all the difference. The,
Yeah.
the state law treats municipalities chartered as cities differently than the rest of us. And so, yes, everybody, first instinct, how does Burlington, it's because they're a city. So,
Because they're chartered as a city.
yeah, the state law is different.
And was that a unilateral decision, or did they have to go through the legislation at the state level to be able to do that?
I don't know the legislative history, but it is it is state statute, so the legislature would have decided in one way or the other. You know, either in giving it to Burlington, like I say, I don't know the legislative history, but I do understand that cities are treated differently from other municipalities. And so municipality like Shelburne, and if Jane's and Audie's here, no, she's not, but people that have been involved with the village safety group have been hearing this repeatedly. State law says that the speed limits have to be based on an engineering study, and those studies essentially boil down to this idea of the 85th percentile speed. So you take the 15% that drive fastest and you lop them off, and then you look at the speed at that next fastest car, and that's considered the speed that the road can be driven at. So that would be the basis for
Who came up with that?
the traffic engineers.
Yeah, so
Right.
again, no
The-
basis in placemaking
the-
or reality, you know?
Did the
because-
auto lobby have to say in that?
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
Huh,
So,
okay.
so
Well-
the way
You
that
see
you
what we're
accomplish
dealing with here.
changes.
We are
Oh,
dealing
I
with
do.
a paradigm.
So the road
Set
should
in
be posted
stone.
at the speed that the cars are going. If you make physical changes that result in the cars going slower and you essentially change the behavior, that's how you would drive down the speed.
Which is
So if you-
placemaking.
So if, for example, the town took these issues seriously and it said, we're going to narrow the lanes, we're gonna put bulb outs, we're gonna put speed tables, we're gonna put all these things that cause people to drive more slowly, you do the study and you find that the 85th percentile speed dropped 15 miles an hour, then you have a justification for your new speed limit.
We'll add that to our legislative agenda.
Yeah. So this is why it's so important to have a manual that describes all of these options that are available to create, force the physical design to create more safety that we would like to have. So, okay.
So transportation 10 has a new,
Yes, I stuck a little thing
matching
in there. Consider establishing, okay, yes. So we know our appetite for doing some of these things is greater than our, the funding that's available. I mean, how long did it take to build that tiny little strip of sidewalk? Well, the one I was talking about that connects to the La Platte Nature area, and also the little tiny spit from the covered bridge at the museum to the school, right? Like years, right? So I just think we have an open space line item every year. I think it's worth trying to sell the select board on letting us do the same thing for, to create a small fund for sidewalks and, whatever for these facilities. And the other thing is that the advantage would be to have a little pot of money in there that could be used to pursue matching grants. Because I've also sat in select board meetings when they literally say, we just don't have the money to pony up the $15,000 or something that would allow us to get this sidewalk grant. They've had to postpone things. And I'm just tired of having that be, I just find that to be unacceptable, given how important these things are to our
Yeah,
quality of
I'm
life
with
and
you. So
how
maybe we
much people
say-
want them.
I think Wendy might have some good news on that front.
yes, Wendy, please share some good news.
So Tuesday night at the select board meeting, which I'm sure you've all heard about, one nice thing that happened was that Jerry Story put forth the suggestion that a line item be added, not grant dependent, but a line item for both the Village Pedestrian Safety Group for the next two years, and a line item for improvements. Jerry sees it as townwide. In the CIP, it says Bay Road street improvements. Particularly, the past committee has suggested a short gravel, so fairly primitive, but gravel, between the fishing access and the Bay Road Park.
Oh, fantastic.
So, and particularly aimed at kids who want to ride their bikes to school. It's treacherous, as we know, along that road, but at least if they could get to the north side of Bay Road, they could ride to where the tie hall connects, have a jug handle, so they're not glancing over their left shoulder before they cut right across traffic, so they could do a jug handle, then look, and then cross. So it was 10 grand, but I think Jerry's looking to have it be kind of 20, and the PAS committee and the pedestrian safety group are looking to work more closely together.
And it's in the
Great.
CIP, so the
And it's in the
document that
CIP.
Peter made his presentation.
Yes.
So it's not the budget, but it
Sure,
informs the
it's-
budget.
right.
Yeah,
Sorry, yeah,
anyway, so
CIP.
just,
But let's keep this, right?
Yeah, just a
Designate
method
matching
for-
funds for.
yeah.
And I noticed that we actually have that maintenance of paths in here, in
Yeah.
that bullet, so we can probably take it out of that previous section.
Let's see.
So objectives 2.
So we don't
Mhm.
need the word supplying, though. We can start with matching, can't we? On the
Yeah, I
bullet.
would say designating, designate,
You could just say for matching funds for grants.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, some of the syntax is a little sloppy.
Yeah, well,
This is sort of thrown together. Let's see, under number 2, I added, to ensure that public streets, roads, and highways are appropriate in size and scale to their function and surrounding land uses, which is, I guess, that functional classification thing you were talking about. Develop street typologies that depict how this is translated into existing contexts in locations within Shelburne, and what is required in scenarios involving new and redevelopment. Because I think, that's, you can plan for some of this in new development more easily than you can insert it into existing places. And we.
so we would say what, involving new development and redevelopment?
Yeah, or maybe it should be existing places or something like that, yeah. Existing, context.
So wait, how is it being edited, or?
Instead of that last word redevelopment, we're replacing that with existing contexts. Um,
Please.
I would like to suggest again a reference to the placemaking planning approach on number 8. So
Number 8.
at the top of the page,
Consider?
under transportation. Yeah, consider planned sidewalk, path, and trail projects identified as highest priority in compliance with a placemaking planning approach by the Bike and Pedestrian Path Committee.
So are you suggesting maybe even use that as a way to, like, prioritize those projects? Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, I would say consistent with instead of
Consistent with.
compliance, but I think the idea is there. Yeah, no objections to that.
Because, what would be really nice is, it costs, obviously it costs money to do this, and the public, getting the public buy-in and all that takes time. And if we can use a placemaking approach, maybe, it's probably not as simple as a slam dunk, but maybe you can have, maybe a couple fewer public meetings, a couple fewer disgruntled people. And we can move forward on these things, so it's not,
Okay.
something that either never happens or happens from 10 years later.
So next page, number 6. I'm just keeping an eye on time.
Okay.
Survey residents.
Yeah, so again, to kind of, how do we get to this place of consensus about how to go about doing this? I think, survey residents about what improvements they would like, as well as what they would like to preserve. Pursue the creation of street typologies that determine how multimodality is achieved in different contexts. So I got the idea for this by looking at something in the Portland area, which had kind of annexed some new areas as part of the city. And they were places that turned out to have significant challenges with stormwater and water quality and things like that. They were very hilly, and they were also places where there were a lot of more kind of low-income people were living. And so there were equity issues about, these were people who it was very, very they were living in these, in places that were overburdened with these, water problems created by, eroding streets and that sort of thing. But they also really needed to be able to get around more easily by foot and by bicycle, because transportation is very costly, and then, to reduce the dependence on the automobile and so forth. So how do you solve that one? So what they did was they actually kind of had these like little charrettes with the folks who live there and said, how do you think we should solve this problem? We have these resource challenges. It's going to be very expensive because of the terrain and how far out this is, et cetera. But we appreciate that we really need to do something for you. And so they kind of all put their heads together and came up with approaches that they're in the process of implementing. And I just thought that was great and thought, maybe that would be the kind of thing we could do, for example, in Bay Road,
Yeah, to me, that's more of a recommended action.
Okay,
I think that would be.
move that down in there, okay.
I 100% agree with the idea.
Yeah.
I think that's.
As well, the beginning paragraph is streets, roads, and highways. The 4th sentence.
Where are you? As well. Yeah,
Where?
just
Oh,
more stylistic. You see that,
oh,
Dean? If you look at the second sentence, under that,
Underneath
streets,
cars, buses, and
roads and
trucks.
highways, beginning traditionally.
I'm sorry, I'm just catching up. I was just focused on the relocation of the earlier
So
one.
that I was saying, add that as a recommended action.
Right, and so I just
As
wasn't sure
opposed
if,
to an
the first
objective.
one, the second one, but So then I've just dropped it there for the time being. So what was
Okay.
the next
Okay.
issue?
Dick just had a stylistic edit on under streets, roads, and highways.
Is it one of the recommended actions?
It's the
Second sentence.
intro.
Says traditionally, these byways
Traditionally,
accommodate
these
motor
byways.
vehicles, cars, buses,
It's
et
above
cetera.
the objectives.
And it just ends the sentence as well, which doesn't really say anything.
What were the words so I can go right to it with a search?
Oh,
Streets,
it's-
roads, and
yeah.
highways is the header.
Don't search that or we'll be doing this.
Okay.
Um,
It's right under street, roads, and highways. It's just like a little typo thing.
yeah, it's just,
Do you see where it says it is also clear? Just before that, there's a little,
In your old one, though, was a footnote.
Yeah, right there.
yeah.
Okay, and so where's
To
this?
the left of the
Yeah.
highlighted,
it's like a weird
right there.
footnote to it. That's
Yeah.
got
I'm just,
the complete streets.
Right where your cursor is.
yeah, just take
Was.
out, just take as well out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just take that footnote out since we already are leaning in on complete streets in the beginning anyway, right? And it's from
Yeah.
'05, so I imagine we have more current
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was,
articles.
Okay,
All right, so
okay. Let's see what
we're
else.
coming on, let's see,
Okay. Yeah, the next page.
why don't we get through streets, roads, and highways?
Okay,
Is that fair?
yeah,
And then everybody else can react to the additional comments in public transportation.
okay.
I don't think much of that looks
So under
controversial.
10, repair bridges identified as deficient in the state's biennial bridge sufficiency assessment. When bridges are reconstructed, they must include facilities for pedestrians and bicycle travel on both sides of the structure. And, maybe that's at least, I think bicycles certainly on both sides of the structure, and maybe pedestrians at least on one side. I don't know, maybe that's too much to have them do both, but it just seems like these are massively expensive infrastructure, pieces of infrastructure that remain intact for years and years, and, getting across them safely is a challenge, always.
Good with that?
So, and then number 13, as soon as possible, update the public works specifications using placemaking approaches to ensure that public streets, roads, and highways are appropriate in size and scale to their function and surrounding uses, land uses, because right now the public works specifications that we have do not achieve this. And then I think 14, regularly review road safety hazards to identify gaps. That would, I meant to say, in the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And require the use of traffic calming techniques. And again, it's just to, really kind of give that constituency a seat at the table, which I don't think it really has right now. And so I think this can all, what I would suggest is that maybe I take another pass at this and sort of try and make it a bit pithier. It's very, like I said, I didn't tackle trying
No,
to.
it's okay, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And then ensure that maintenance of these facilities is, a high priority for the town's road manager.
Okay.
I thought, giving him the directive that this is an expectation, will make it easier for him to, make the case with making sure he has funds and people to help with this. So, and then, yeah, do you want to just stop with that? Is that good enough?
Well, yeah, why don't we take it to
Okay.
there? I mean, I noticed you did a good amount of work here on parking, so
Yeah,
people can read it on their own, but if I know it's a topic we have discussed recently as well. So I think if people, what I would ask if commissioners have suggestions, objections, changes to the concepts, then let's flow them to Dean so that we can continue a conversation. If it's more editing type changes, then please, just feel free to send them to Kate as suggestions for editing, and she'll incorporate them through the Google Doc links.
While Dean is still on the screen, could I ask one question about number 9, recommended action? It's right above the page that you're on. I'm not sure why, but the fourth bullet point, the use by all types of users in various travel modes, including pedestrians or other non-pedestrian users. I guess maybe that does make sense.
Where is that?
It's the second to last bullet.
It's on the end of the page here.
Oh, yeah.
So is that
Clicked
like
on that one.
people on bicycles and, I don't know, skateboards or something, or?
I don't know why. I flagged it the first time I read through it, and for some reason, it doesn't sound right to me. When I said it out loud, it made sense, but, I mean, I understand what it's getting after. I just didn't, if that reads
Maybe
fine.
clearer pedestrians and cyclists. I mean, it's,
Y-
Yeah, if we
Yeah,
don't
those
know
are
what it
main-
means, we probably ought to change it.
if you're not walking, biking, you could be riding a skateboard, I guess. But that one
Yeah,
foot on the
unless
ground, does that make
unless
you
the
pedestrian?
intent is to say other non-motorized users or pedestrians or non-motorized, I don't know. It just jumped out at me, and every time I read it,
Yeah,
it makes me twitch.
cyclists, bicyclists, because, you could have unicyclists,
Tricyclists.
tricyclists.
We don't need to get hung up on it now. It's in the notes. Non-what?
Non-motorized?
Yeah, that was actually what I had written, but then I wasn't sure if that made sense. I have a note, we can come back to it.
Okay.
It's certainly not critical.
Okay. All right, well, thank you
Do-
guys for
yeah,
slogging
no,
through.
Thank you, Kate,
That was-
Thank
for
you.
taking the laboring oar on that. Since we have, do you want to take a few minutes to talk through the proposed changes that you submitted, since you're both here? No, you're comfortable with just,
Oh, no, you incorporated all the main.
Oh, good,
concerns
good.
From my point of view.
Good,
Okay.
okay,
And
good.
we were operating on the old,
sure. So
Yeah.
in your opinion, I don't know if you speak for
no, I just speak for myself.
your own.
But I think you've done a great job.
Okay.
Good, okay,
Well, thank you.
yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
I guess I would ask if you want us to circle back to these comments. I don't know if Linda, we didn't get a chance to have Linda on the
Well,
line, but.
it's funny because I didn't know who else was coming, but I did email it to Linda just before the start of the meeting, thinking that if she was participating by phone, she would have a copy as well. But I didn't send it to everybody else, but I wasn't thinking. But anyway, she at least has a copy.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah,
I
and
I
the
just want to
issue-
make sure that we're giving this due consideration, since you took time to prepare this, and,
Mhm.
And I think I'm comfortable talking to Linda.
Okay,
about Why I support what you've done.
great,
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Because
Yeah.
I couldn't say placemaking, planning approach without trying to talk
Right.
about what it meant.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, and as
yeah.
you can see, we sort of have some work to do to get this rough conceptual change pulled
Yeah.
through. So once we get that new working draft, we'll circle back to this to make sure that we've incorporated, or at least addressed. We may not agree with everything that's in here, but we can at least make sure we've discussed it.
Well, for me, it's that broad approach, community building.
Yeah.
Safety.
Right.
You're being inclusive in a way that I think will really help the whole process.
But yeah, how to do it in a way that gives everybody kind of a seat at the table, that where you can kind of craft these things, to find common ground for how to solve these problems. Just gives a bit more flexibility than what we were presented with.
And you're building consensus, which is going to enhance the whole lifestyle here in Shelburne.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah, particularly for our pretty part of it.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah,
thank you
thank
for the
you.
time on this and
Thanks.
for the input and for staying. Okay, so is everybody clear on how we need to progress the transportation section here? People will provide comments or feedback on Kate's proposed changes, and we'll start to pull through the edits from tonight as well as any additional
Particularly on just
stylistic edits that folks have.
I didn't even bother with that.
There's a lot of ideas. I was excited to get to the parking spot because it's been something that's been on my mind.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to talk parking?
I-
Let's talk while we're, I mean, the
It's-
telecom piece, honestly, like, there
If we-
won't be
if-
many
if- if we-
updates.
if
I-
we
We
have
did
a
it
few
a few
minutes,
years
'cause-
ago, and there's not much to update, so I'd
Okay.
rather spend the time talking about the topic that we were
Because on
focused
some
on
of your
tonight.
bullet points, you say having too much cannot be good, having
Yeah.
too little cannot be good, and we're always looking for ways to generate revenue. And one of the things that Dick brought up last time when we were chatting was around, building some sort of parking garage, which nobody would want to be built anywhere that is a visual eyesore. But one of the things that we keep running into is people that want to open a business or use an existing space are running into these issues of number of parking spaces for number of seats in the establishment, et cetera. And so with all of the reading that you've done around town planning and kind of how you approach this, I was curious kind of what your thoughts were on, do we need to keep a hard and fast rule on specifically for, say, a restaurant or a bar, like how many parking spaces you need for number of seats? Or can we figure out a way to add more flexibility so that it is easier for businesses to utilize existing spaces?
The latter is what I would advocate, and I would actually advocate that we get rid of parking. We have parking maximums. We don't have parking minimums anymore, and I try to make craft a little bit of an argument for why I think that is an approach that makes sense.
Yeah, that's recommended action too. That's
Yeah,
what people are following.
in the village, and so maybe just reading that would be helpful for people out not here.
Under the parking subheader,
Yeah.
in recommended actions, number 2, revise zoning
Yeah.
specifications.
So I start off by acknowledging that to create successful places, it's crucial to adequately accommodate the automobile. However, reliance on off-street parking comes at a significant cost to both property owners and the community. The highest land values as measured by per square mile in Shelburne are in the historic village. This is something we learned when we were looking at Route 7, where residences, businesses are concentrated in productive clusters organized in a settlement pattern that prioritizes buildings over parking and roads. In this context, the value of buildings vastly outperforms the value of surface parking. Village roads contribute nothing to the town's budget and actually cost taxpayers to own and maintain. So Shelburne adopted form-based zoning in the Route 7 corridor after recognizing that a contributing factor of this area's underperformance was parking. Parking had come to occupy too much space, creating stormwater impacts that worsen Lake Champlain water quality, which are increasingly costly to mitigate. So buildings separated by parking lots have eroded walkability and sense of place. So as a historic area, Shelburne Village has an existing building stock and a limited capacity to provide parking. It's important to recognize on-street parking opportunities in the village as collectively owned community resource and a valuable community asset. Shelburne citizens pay for the land and the maintenance of infrastructure in public rights-of-ways through taxes. To leverage the inherent economic value of this existing productive place, there should be more on-street parking on the village streets. When parking is underutilized, inefficient, or prohibited, this squanders a collectively owned resource. On-street parking must be recognized as an invaluable way to address village parking needs. And that's probably can be way edited, but I was just trying to, spitball this idea out. So right-sizing the parking capacity in both on-street and off-street locations is critical to accommodating cars and expanding the village's appeal as a pedestrian destination. On-street parking increases walkability by providing separation between traffic and pedestrians and by forcing traffic on narrow roads to slow down. And I was thinking specifically of Falls Road when I wrote that. That would be the quickest way for those guys to get that desired lowering in the speed limit would be to just simply extend on-street parking down that street. I would say, maybe to somewhere around the post office. So that's my thought on that.
Do we have the authority to put on-street parking, like that area you're saying on Falls Road from the post office on in?
I think we do.
I mean, who's the we? The town, it's a town road, that the
Yeah.
town.
Royal we, yes, the town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the town can do that, we have a bicycle facility or a separate area that has been designated, so if you have the parking, you have to work those things together, but yes, it's a road under town control.
And we can put parking meters on those as well?
Yeah, I don't know the law on parking meters, I'm guessing that we can.
Okay.
No one's
I had
suggested parking meters.
Suggested at one time that we use that fill area as a parking space. You could probably put 8 or so cars there, but it didn't go
What's the
anywhere.
fill area?
Just where the last house is, across the road from the church, Catholic church, there's a fill area
Oh.
that was filled in, and it's a fill area.
Is that the town's property?
It is town property.
Oh.
Yeah, well, if we're thinking of the same place. The other thing I was going to mention quickly, it's been a number of years, but several years ago, there was a study that looked at some places within the village where additional parking might be developed. Some of the ideas rely on property owners being willing to lease portions of their property to the town for, 10 or 15 years, and they have to agree with the idea of it. But it hasn't been discussed for a number of years. And it doesn't always have the support of the property owners.
Right.
Anyway, it just kind of, we have a problem with speed, we have a problem with, there's a perception that the village is too vehicle-oriented in terms of its aspect, and then this is creating, functional problems to do with that encourage speed and that sort of thing. So this just seemed like, a low-hanging fruit approach to solving some of those problems. And there's so much evidence that shows how this enhances livability. You can add street trees, you can, create a really lovely public realm, and make productive places, even more productive than they are. So,
One of the
yeah.
things that came out was when they did the thing in 2006, they had planned on putting parking on the Village Green, and we argued strongly against that. Because the Village Green is getting smaller all the time, the parking that is on Church Street that didn't used to be there. That was just, it was grass.
Mhm.
So that parking lot, so as we add more parking, we're losing our green. Which-
Right. Well, I wouldn't,
Yeah, I don't think you're
I
suggesting
wouldn't
that.
advocate putting,
Yeah.
I was thinking about the other side of Falls Road.
There used to be parking on that side, and they took it out because of safety of people crossing between cars and walking into the traffic
Well, that could be,
off that sidewalk.
that can be handled so many, different ways.
That's the way they handle it.
Yeah, not, that way is a not, I would argue, not effective way to handle it, but,
Yeah.
but anyway, I
opportunities
just,
there.
yeah, I think there are some opportunities. And I think it would help deal with the speed issues that, are really kind of hair-raising, I think, for some of those folks on Falls Road and Marset to,
But what you're
Yeah.
interested in was up on Route 7, which is a small building that used to do, I don't know what they did, some kind of commercial enterprise was in there. It was just employees. It was like 8 or 10 employees, I think, and they did service, some kind of equipment, where Will just closed up.
Yeah, yes, this is the same discussion people were having at the last meeting.
And
Yeah.
so that's why the building was large. And the same thing could be said across the street. There was a kitchen supply place in there, or a kitchen with a couple apartments upstairs, and they're way too small for anything. because people would look at putting restaurants in there and there's never enough parking either. So, but yet, north of there is an empty parking lot. It's been empty for 15 years.
Where is this?
The Sirloin Saloon.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty far up.
So, anyway, I think, again, the, sort of a placemaking approach can really help inform what makes, what approach makes sense in what condition, you know, what would make sense in Route 7, which is, you know, going to always be an auto-oriented place, is different from, I think, what makes sense in the village. So,
Got it.
so anyway, it's just to try and get that, and I made it way too sort of verbose about, I don't know, the economic value of streets and things like that, so I'll find a way to synthesize that.
So let's do that, right? So you'll pull through some of these edits and fine tuning, and then
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful for everybody just to react to that at some point, whenever that's ready.
Okay.
Great. Okay, next item on the agenda is telecom, telecommunications towers. It's a very short section, it's a very recent section. We worked on this a few years back as a commission. And I don't have any recommended changes necessarily, other than an observation that based on the town plans I've looked at, it's a little bit unique in the sense that most don't have a standalone telecom section, and they seem to be incorporated into economic development in most cases, or sometimes, you know, energy and infrastructure type section. So I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping this as its own section. I raise that as more of an observation, that it's a little odd and funky, and it is that way because of the chronology, more than anything else, of how that was developed, in my opinion. It wasn't integrated into the broader plan because we were addressing more of a one-off point-in-time issue that we felt was easier to pull together as a separate section than try to reincorporate into a broader section. So I don't have any issues with keeping it standalone, other than we might be able to plug it in somewhere else if, if the commission feels interested in doing that.
I think as we go through the town plan, if we come across a place where that might fit in nicely,
Yeah,
we could do that.
we can do that.
So
It's-
you're
it's a
saying
page and a
not-
half.
It's not really required to be in the town plan?
It's not a required element.
It's not a required
In and of
element.
itself. There's-
No.
Yeah.
Do we have an edit for
No, because I didn't edit it. All you have in there is the current town plan from 2013, 14?
that? Towers and
14, I
tele.
think.
2014,
13 or
so
14, yeah.
not very long ago.
The one thing that has changed is the name of the Public Service Board, Public
Correct.
Utility
Yep,
Commission.
that we should change. I mean,
This
that's
is
a
the section.
public
Utility
utility
Commission.
commission now.
This is what we're looking at.
The PUC, yes,
Okay.
yep.
So
So-
the only idea I had on this
Yeah.
topic is that we had come to the conclusion that we were going to try to select some areas that would be suitable for this to help us.
Yes.
And I don't know if we should do
So we
something.
have, in other words, add a recommended action.
Recommended action.
Yeah.
To do some citing, or
Mhm.
recommended citing, or,
Like,
I don't even, and we were also talking about
like
using.
we were talking about co-location as much as possible, and also seeing if we could make use of existing tall, okay, so they like to be, the general idea is they like to be in tall areas, you know, for obvious reasons, because it's all visual connectivity. And so one of our areas that we've designated for putting these things is the Commerce and Industry North, which is not really going to be very appealing because it's sort of backdropped by, you know, elevation, right? So it's not very compelling location. On the other hand, the old water tower up on Spear Street,
It's no longer ours.
yeah, and I thought that was such a missed opportunity. I was thinking that thing should have been festooned with this stuff. We could have made money. We could have, you know, there would have
The
been.
elevation was not that good there, was it, Dean? Wasn't there an
It's a water tower, it's gotta be good,
I think it was
inherently
competing
good.
interests. One, yeah, if, there was some momentum going in the direction of having it turn over to CWD, and CWD evidently has a policy not to have those kinds of things on their tanks.
Very expensive for
So, but
maintenance.
no one that I'm aware of crunched the numbers on the potential revenue if,
Mm-hmm.
and if they would have been great enough to justify keeping it.
I emailed Joe probably 10 times pestering him about this, because I thought that was such a
Do we
missed opportunity.
Do we still own that land?
I think that it has finally transferred, but I'm not certain of
So
that.
the land went with the tower?
I don't want to say. I would need to check.
But let's refocus,
Yeah.
since that is history.
So right now, there's, I don't think, with CWSD or whatever they're called, the water people,
So we were talking about
So-
maybe riding on the high power lines, if possible, on their poles.
yeah, that was the other thing I was looking at. And Velco was very interested in this idea. Dean and I went down to talk with them, and they were like, yes, we love that,
They like to rent their poles.
Well, because they're trying to find ways to, they have apparently fiber optics running all through there, and they're trying to monetize this. So that they thought this was great. So
We were going to get some help from a UVM professor
Yes,
who didn't
I remember.
end
it
up
didn't
really helping
materialize.
us
It
much.
just
Fell
didn't
through.
materialize. So,
I just
For the map.
yeah.
for helping with the
Yeah.
mapping and some of those technical things,
Yeah.
I will just throw out, there
Yeah.
are some things that are really easy to use that can give you some kind of line of sight. So you
We-
could create some maps.
We were trying to anticipate where, whoever, AT&T, for example, might want to create a sort of, network, what might be places that would be particularly appealing to them, and, try and look at, do we have any, maybe like a tall barn or a steeple or, something that might, like the water tower, that might be, attractive as an existing structure for these things that might be in that same
Yeah.
vicinity. And we could sort of say, hey, we have these things, and, if you pay us money, we will, just sort of a win-win for everybody. We were trying to come up with something like that, rather than, neighbors get a letter in the mail saying, surprise, there's going to be a, 800-foot thing in the field next to your house,
You don't even get a letter,
Yeah, right.
to be honest with you.
Very, very quickly, I was going to say, we don't have, well, the UVM professor didn't pan out, but there is a person who the town has consulted with as things have been going forward with the tank south of town. And the reports are he's been incredibly helpful.
Oh.
Maybe he would be a resource. So that's just something else to
Yeah.
mention. The other thing, changing technology, something that is happening now that I see applications or the paperwork on that most people don't see is these facilities that are put on poles. So there's one in front of Kevin's, as an example. There's another one up Route 7 about half of the way. So some of the technology that the companies are using are different from the technology, they may have less need, and this is a kind of question that the person who
Those
helped
things
us with the
form a
water tower.
network.
Sorry?
They network together, those poles.
They're like little,
They're part of the phone network. I think in both these cases, they're Verizon, they're part of Verizon's network. But I just
Yeah.
wanted to say that, the tower proposal for the area over south of Bishop Road never came to the point where an application was filed. And so that was to address that part of town, but the action in terms of where traffic is along Route 7, and they're addressing that not through towers, but through facilities on
Co-locating,
poles.
yeah.
yeah.
So let me do this. Let me craft together a couple recommended actions that the group can react to, and then we'll discuss this section at a future meeting.
Also, something to possibly consider, policy number 2 is to prohibit facilities and towers in the rural area and the conservation area. I understand the conservation area. I also understand the reasoning behind the rural area, but on the comment of technology, I had a clause, unless it can leverage an existing structure or land features. Mostly just to say, unless we're saying we're gonna blanket
Yeah.
just none of this in the rural, no matter what.
There's almost not enough elevation anywhere out there.
Yeah, that may be, I just didn't know. if
You're
you-
just saying based on technology improvements, there may be opportunities based
Yeah.
with for existing structures.
Or
and-
like the proverbial antenna on a silo kind of thing?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah.
Open to that.
Now that, you know, that sort of beacon thing that's up on off of Dorset Street, is that in Shelburne or South Burlington?
It's in Shelburne.
It's in Shelburne. Is that the kind of thing that you could co-locate these things on, or would the FAA just say, no
I-
way?
Maybe I don't know who would have the answer. My gut tells me they don't want any interference with that because that's
Yeah.
for guiding the planes to the airport.
Where's the bacon?
This is drawing a blank on, who's the guy who owns, well, just north of Frank Cole's, south of Maley's, the Maley Farm, on the east side as you're looking,
You ever
I'm sorry,
notice
on the
that-
west side as you're
That funny
looking
little
towards the west.
cone-shaped building
It looks
that's
kind
there?
of, yeah, it
Oh,
looks
that
like,
goes
kind
to
of
the
like a bowling
airport?
pin.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
I
to
always-
help guide
Part of a
planes
local,
in.
yeah.
I always thought it was just sort of like a light or something that.
No, I
that-
thought it was for a small
But-
airport up there. I had no idea it was.
So, you know,
tied
if
together.
the South Burlington water tower thing ever gets resolved, that could be something where we could see about, I don't know, maybe pursue these telecommunications things on that.
That's CWD's too.
It is?
Right, CWD owns but South Burlington contributed to the expansion in capacity, but it is CWD's tank, yeah.
Yeah. Somebody needs to get to
I
those
think
guys.
that's a pretty good coverage area already, isn't it, up there?
I lose my signal
Do you?
there almost
you?
every day.
When I say
Dorset
good, I
Street.
mean relatively good.
Right.
Maybe it's my Verizon.
Okay, let's move on.
Anyway.
Next item is updates from staff. Dean, anything you want to share with us? I know we had a
Well,
couple.
I think maybe all eyes towards Monday and the retreat. I have some information that I have assembled. I won't bore you with the details, but the questions came up in connection with the Historic Preservation and Design Review folks about infill. So I've got some information on that. They are talking about that issue further. They also are talking about the idea of identifying landmarks. So information has been going back and forth between what you're doing and what they're doing. They may be holding a retreat of their own on
good.
November 18th.
Defining infill?
Yeah, well, I think that defining infill, that's actually one of the things that I did was come up with definitions, because I think for people to have a meaningful
Yeah.
conversation, we have to know that we're talking about the same thing. But they are, they're gonna have their own perspective on it, but they will have a retreat on the 18th, and I think that will help them in their conversations with you. Dick, you had asked about a version of the build-out map with the acreages on
I
that?
did see that.
Okay.
What's the historic landmark?
Historic landmarks is just this idea that his HBDRC members are concerned about certain structures in the village that are seeing neglect, and if nothing is done, they could just fall
Yeah.
apart. And the statute authorizes municipalities to designate landmarks. We have somewhat done that as part of form-based zoning. So one of the things that could conceivably happen is a village series of landmarks is identified, and that could be transmitted into the zoning regulations in some
Yeah.
fashion. But they haven't identified those, but I think they could start to, in time, or set it as an objective.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I was going to mention is that Perry has presented to you in the past on projections as part of the growth and development section. I have done digging and gotten more of the background information about the methodology behind that.
Great. So everybody got the agenda for Monday night, hopefully. We have a.
Is that online?
Agenda,
Dean emailed it out today.
I just sent a
Yeah,
link
yeah.
that had another copy of the agenda, well, it linked to a folder with the agenda and a bunch of other
Yeah.
things.
Okay.
But it didn't get mailed. It's not.
I was
Did not get
like
mailed.
about
Okay.
No.
5 o'clock,
Yeah.
4:30.
Oh, okay, I must have just missed that, okay.
Okay. Next item, Commissioner questions and comments, anything? Any pressing questions, any?
I have a comment to make
Please.
about the Shelburne Bay Park. I noticed there were multiple new benches that were put through in addition to the gravel, and so I know that many members of the community have been very frustrated and upset during some of the recent select board meetings, and I found it quite enjoyable to see the upkeep of our parks, and, you know, it was nice to see improvements, and the town is running well. So,
So they put benches at the park?
so in Shelburne Bay Park, along one of the trails, they had some different stopping points around, some of the more higher elevation and then lower elevation, and I've been noticing that there have been more walks from some more elderly members of the community, either from the Arbors or Wake Robin, and I think as we expand those facilities, we need to have the appropriate,
Right.
you know, infrastructure so
Yeah.
that everybody can enjoy the public spaces, so I think that's great.
So maybe even with the transportation thing, we talk about furnishings.
Were there objections to that, or?
Objections to benches? I sure hope not.
No, I thought you were, I thought you suggested that there were.
No, I think he was
comments.
just saying it was
I-
a
I'm just-
nice
No,
counterpoint.
I'm
to-
just saying something positive where there's nothing that anybody can be upset about.
Thank you.
That's where we want to get
Isn't that
transportation.
refreshing?
He's anti-bench.
No anti-benchers. We don't need them coming out to these meetings. Okay,
Yeah, I will not be
Jason.
able to make the
Okay.
meeting, the next meeting.
no
on the
worries.
ninth.
On the next planning commission meeting?
Right.
Okay.
PC.
So we are.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
November meeting, I think we are agreed that we'll meet once.
When are you anticipating
Is the ninth,
that
you said?
meeting?
Second Tuesday.
So the first half of the month,
Yes.
yes.
First
Second,
half.
second Thursday
Not
would be the
Thanksgiving.
11th, I
Yes.
believe.
Well, no, my
Whatever
wife's
the
due
number,
December
yeah, I can't
6th
remember,
with the baby,
7, 8.
so
On the 9th,
There's a
there's-
chance that I may not.
Yeah.
We're going to stay with the
Regular-
second
yeah.
Thursday,
That would be the 9th of
The 9th.
November.
right?
And did you just say that you were away?
I will be away.
Okay.
I could potentially call in.
Well, we'll have to figure out.
We
that.
have moved it in the past, if there's a desire to, I mean, we have a meeting Monday, so to move it up would be like 3 weeks in a row of meetings. I don't know how much appetite there is for that, but I throw it out there as if that second Thursday is problematic, if not, we'll just
I actually wouldn't be able to make next Thursday.
plan to meet. I'm just trying to get Jason to go.
Well, no, and
Um,
I also wouldn't be able to make next Thursday. I'll be in Boston.
Okay, well, let's just stick with the
Send that
9th.
picture, that would be
The
It sounds
Well,
like
see you
that's
Monday,
probably,
and then the
yes,
9th.
see you Monday, we'll stick
I
with
can
the
let
9th
VCAM
for
know just the one
the
meeting.
regular planning commission meeting, and then take Thanksgiving off, of course, and then we'll pick it back up
December.
in December. Okay? Is that it? Any other business? Consider a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Kate, seconded by Dick. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everybody.
So Perry, several
Good night.
years ago,